First up on the agenda is special presentations, introductions. We would like to give a warm welcome to Megan Phelps, who's joining Community Power as a programs associate. I first met Megan about 6 years ago. Introduce yourself.
Yeah, thank you, David. Maybe which is
Requests that an item be removed for separate discussion and action. The CAC received staff reports for all items on the consent agenda, and staff provided an opportunity for questions and comments during briefing held prior to this meeting. Today's consent agenda includes the approval of the November 13th, 2025 CAC meeting minutes, an update on marketing, public relations, and local government affairs, an update on customer operations, fourth, an update on programs, fifth, an update on power services, and sixth was the update on regulatory and legislative affairs. Laurie, do we have any public comment on any of these items?
we do not, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Is there anyone who would like to remove any item from the consent agenda for a separate vote? Okay, seeing no objections, seeing no objections, I will now turn it over to the committee members for a motion to approve the consent.
So moved.
Okay, we have a motion from Ross. Second. Second, Peter Anderson. Okay, Mike, let's call the roll.
Committee Member Gonzalez.
Aye.
Committee Member Stefani.
Aye.
Committee Member Hammond.
Thumbs up.
Just allow you to speak. Can you talk?
I now have mic permissions. Aye.
Perfect, thank you. Committee Member Hoyt.
Aye.
Committee Member Sumner.
Aye.
Committee Member Emerson.
Aye.
Committee Member Anderson.
Aye.
Committee Member Vasilakis.
Aye.
Secretary Pike.
Aye.
Vice Chair Montero Adams.
Aye.
And Chair Harris.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Okay. Moving on, the regular agenda starts with item 7, the fiscal year end 2024-25 performance review. As a reminder to members, you may ask staff clarifying questions during the presentation, but I kindly ask that we wait until the end of the presentation for a full discussion of any issues. I will now turn it over to the finance team to provide the presentation.
Good afternoon to Chair, to Vice Chair, to committee members. I'm Dr. Kirk Washington, Chief Financial Officer and Treasurer at San Diego Community Power. I could not be more excited to present this item to this group. I'll be presenting a report out of fiscal year-end results based on our audited financial statement compared to our budget. Next slide, please. So this slide really summarizes the composite variances that we've experienced through our fiscal reporting cycle. It really speaks to the diligence of staff and the demonstration of good stewardship over the funds that are laid to our charge as an agency. So I'd like to highlight in this particular summary, we actually exceeded our budget in terms of our bottom line results to just under $67 million. There's some factors that factor into that results, and I'll go through some of those at a really high level for you in the next slides. So we ended the year with a net position of 100.8 million compared to what we budgeted for, as you see in this slide, the 34.1 million. So the factors that contributed to those results included net operating revenues coming in above what we budgeted for, operating expenses, including energy costs as well as non-energy costs, and then contributions from our investment strategies that also contributed to the bottom line results. Next slide, please. So our net revenue, what contributed to results of coming in about 2% over what we budgeted, really is attributed to what we budgeted for uncollectible accounts. Actual collections were somewhat lower than what we budgeted for. That contributed to a better than expected revenue results. Our lowest price product, Power Base, we assumed in our budget, we budgeted for a 15% participation rate, where in the actual results, we had participation of 1.3. That also contributed positively to our revenue results. And then in the month of June, the actual demand was higher as it related to the temperatures. That also contributed to our net revenue results that positively impacted our bottom lines. Next slide, please. So getting into some of the details in terms of the savings as it relates to the expenses, as you can see in the block on the box on the left, the savings from a non-energy cost perspective, where staff is really methodical and thoughtful about how we engaged our vendors, and those spends contributed to expense savings, as well as personnel costs, where hiring, we budgeted for hiring positions, and those positions were either still vacant at fiscal year end or had not yet been hired, and that would also include all the other costs associated with those positions. We're approaching north of 100 staff members, and so the budget is there to support those positions. Those positions are budgeted and necessary, although our staff has been really good about getting the work done without those positions, but those positions are actually needed. It's work-life balance, and we stress a lot of people out. So hats off and kudos to our staff for rolling those streets, digging in, and still making it for the agency. Energy costs, market price benchmarks that are set by the California Public Utility Commission. You'll hear more about that in the next presentation from my colleagues, as well as savings on some of the resources allocations from SDG&E. And then also from a non-operating income perspective, that savings or that contribution was from the investment activities and the agency executing on its investment strategy. Next slide, please. So from a reserve perspective and really building the agency to be sustainable and to build a stable entity, we've built reserves over a period of time. And this is a reserve book, which is what mitigates the risk that we face. You'll hear more on that in the next presentation as well. But as you can see over time, since we start serving our customers through the fiscal year end as of 6/30/2025, really is a reflection of our reserve bill. So you'll notice a big jump in, looks like June 2023, starting in 2023. And that's a reflection of jurisdictions being enrolled into our program that was scheduled as we enroll those customers over a series of phases. So that's a contribution to that jump, as well as some things that were happening in the regulatory space, as you'll hear more later, with regard to PCIA, market price benchmarks, things of that nature. So we managed to build as we continue to grow. And so that also executes on one of our strategic goals to making sure we are financially stable. Next slide. With respect to the contribution from our investment portfolio, again, being good stewards of those dollars and really doing the best we can to maximize the return on those investments. Chandler Asset Management is our investment advisor, and they've exceeded our benchmark that we set when we first launched the program with them, to the tune of about 50 basis points over our benchmark. So what we've been able to earn on our investments are north of 4%. And so I'd like to conclude with, although we've done great with the resources that we've been in charge over, and all of these positive variances that we were able to achieve in fiscal year 2025, we still have a lot of risk that's ahead of us that we have to make sure that we can mitigate. And one of the key ways for us to mitigate those risks are making sure that we have reserves in place to support things that we don't expect to happen should they occur. We'll have an opportunity to allocate resources to cover some of those things and still have an opportunity to rebuild from there. So again, hats off to staff and all the things that we've done that are within our control, primarily the non-energy expenses, and really being prudent in our spend, really having line of sight as we set budgets that we are able to contribute in that way from a fiscal perspective. So with that, Mr. Chair, I will turn it back over to you. Thank you all for your time.
Does anyone have clarifying questions? Member Anderson.
Sure. Well, thanks for the good report, Dr. Eric. I appreciate it. You talked about two kinds of investments. And let me ask a couple of questions about those. The first kind mentioned you did well on our investment portfolio. Tell us about the investment portfolio. What is that? Is that what we do with cash on hand to make sure that it gets a better rate of return than just put it in a CD or something? Yeah.
No, that's a great question. Mr. Anderson, thank you so much for asking. Yes, absolutely. So again, as a treasurer, I have the fiduciary responsibility to make sure that we protect those funds to the extent possible. Put those funds or leverage those funds to generate additional non-operating income. So
are those invested in equities?
those are invested primarily in commercial bonds that are high investment rating. At the Finance and Risk Management Committee, we had our advisor come out and just get an update on those items. And so they're primarily in short to intermediate term funds. So the longer out we invest in those bond maturities, the better return, and we can lock in those for a longer period of time. Again, leveraging to the extent possible those resources, which are the reserve dollars that continue to feed into the reserve bill, as well as the financial sustainability.
So those bonds are less subject to market fluctuations than, say, equities.
Yes, exactly. So because you're able to lock in those returns, those rates over a longer period of time, they've they've performed quite nicely in spite of the volatility that we're seeing.
My final follow-up is you also talked about capital investments, and that's a different category altogether.
So the capital investment plan, yeah, that's a different category.
Got it.
That one specifically speaks to some of the programs, and those are actual resources that community power and carves out, we budget for funds. Thank you for the question.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other members have clarifying questions? Member Emerson.
Yes, Dr. Washington, can you go to the very first slide? And as a non-accounting person, when I look at that very first slide, there was a budget, with all the numbers, yeah. There's a budget, 34 million, and there's an actual, sounds like we overspent.
Thank you for that question.
Just, and then the difference, so could you go over that again? I think you were explaining, but I didn't catch what, maybe why it's so different.
Yes, I'd be happy to, Emerson. So essentially looking at the bottom line, the net position. So let me back up. Let me go through the verticals first. So after the items column, which is the column to the far left, the second column to the immediate right of that were the actual results. So those are the actual results in terms of our revenues, our total expenses, and then our non-revenue items. So the net position, we landed at 108 million, 100. The budgeted item is what we budgeted. And then the item to the right of that is where we land in terms of the budget. So that's the difference between the actuals and the budget. So I'll start with the total operating revenue. So the total operating revenue budgeted for 1,243,000,000. I'm sorry, our actual was 1,243,000,000. Our budget was 1,221,000,000. And we landed a delta where our actuals were higher than what we budgeted for, which is a good thing for us. And the difference is 21.7 million.
It's so positive.
That's a positive. That's favorable for us.
It-
Absolutely. And then if you go down to the bottom in that difference column, the column to the far right, we actually were better off to the tune of 67 million compared to what we thought we would hit at 34. Is that up?
I don't know why I'm lost. Maybe I'll talk to you.
I'd be happy to take a deep dive.
Somehow I'm not catching it.
Okay.
All right, let's go to member Hammond. He has a question.
Thank you. I just had a question. You had mentioned the demand, the actual load was 4% higher, citing June was hotter. I was just wondering what the demand in June was, like how much more it was. Was it just 4% or
So
what percent, how much higher it was? And then also with climate change and it getting hotter and hotter, I'm curious if that's considered when having future projections and demand expectations.
I just want to make sure I understand the question. And so the 4% higher than expected, the demand, so that was actual energy demand. So June is typically the first really going into the summer months. And so what this tells me, and I have to get with my data team to get more granularity around that and come back to you with it. But what that tells me is that the demand was higher due to higher than expected temperatures or historic temperatures. Does that answer your question?
No, but it's okay. I was just curious how much how much more was the demand in June, just out of curiosity, because you had specified of the whole year that was the outlier of why revenues were higher. And so I was just curious if you knew, but it's okay if you don't.
Yeah, no, I'd be happy to get that information and come back to you with it. We've got the data for sure. I just didn't prepare that in the presentation tonight, but I'd be happy to report back to you.
Okay, either you're busy. It's okay if you don't. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for the question.
Any other members have clarifying? Okay, Mari, do we have any public comment on this item?
We do not, Mr. Chair.
I just want to piggyback off of what Tara
Yeah.
said. I think that would actually be an interesting thing to track in the future, just as a correlation in terms of temperature and like energy use, just to see, not just from a revenue perspective, but like environmental perspective, and that could help inform some maybe some policy work that could be happening for agencies.
Thank you.
Okay, does anyone have any discussion of the presentation? Beyond what's already been, yes,
Sorry. So I remember early on, we talked about having reserves were important that would help with our credit rating. So has there been any recent change in the credit rating as a result of this going up to the current level?
That's a great question, Mr. Anderson. And so the next presentation will give a little more insight over that. However, reserves are also important for us to achieve a credit rating. We're really close. We don't have a public credit rating yet, but you'll see in one of the slides for the presentation that will follow, sort of a comparison of the CCAs that are rated. And if we compare ourselves to them and where they're rated, I'm confident that we probably get a pretty high investment grade credit rating
At a future.
at a future point in time. Could potentially be as early as in the first or second quarter of next year, when we'll go out and sort of do that from a public perspective. Thank you.
Montero, Ms. Jim.
Well, first, for Tara, I just wanted to say that your question was the exact question that I was planning to ask. So I just want to say that I think many of us were on that trend. And I was wondering if that might make sense, maybe a question to CEO for a consent calendar addition. I know that we get a monthly review of customer opt-ins, opt-ups, opt-outs. Would that be something that we could get a regular monthly update on as to whether or not consumption stayed on track with budgeting, or if electrical consumption was higher or lower in the previous month than what we had projected? I think that might be just, instead of asking for a one-time presentation, that might be an interesting thing for us to track and see month to month, without it being a presentation, just a consent calendar. Also stating that I'm not asking staff to do more work that is needed, and if that is particularly too large of an ask, I'm happy to retract it.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman,
Member Anderson.
I too was a little confused about this June anomaly. Now, in June 21st, the sun reaches its apogee. We get more power than at any other time of the year. So in June, my solar produces all my power. Other months, not so much. So it doesn't make sense to me that demand for energy throughout San Diego would be higher in June rather than lower. Also, we had a very cool June. I didn't even have my air conditioner on once during June. So the warrant for your explanation is that there was more demand. Could we actually, not now, but sometime get those numbers to see if that was in fact the reason?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Again, the data team should have.
Because
data.
it just doesn't make total sense to me. Demand should go down on June 21st. In fact, the whole month of June and early July. Because that's when the numerous solar installations throughout the county in people's roofs and backyards are generating maximum power. So.
Okay.
Thank you.
Good for future. This is the receive and file item, and no further action is needed. Thank you, Dr. Washington, for your report.
Thank you all again for your attention.
Let's move on now to item 8, resolution approving a fourth revision to the financial reserves policy. I will now turn it over to the finance team. whole meeting is finance.
Yeah, part of the finance team. Yeah, so good evening, Chair Harris, Vice Chair Montero Adams, and Secretary Pike. Committee members, my name is Timothy Mangelmont, Director of Finance. I had the pleasure of co-presenting today with my colleague Deb Spengler, Strategic Manager of Finance, Senior Strategic Manager of Finance. Sorry, I got that senior part in there. I had the pleasure today of presenting an item today as a receive and file actually, so there's a little correction on that on the action item for a Fourth Amendment to our reserve policy. And actually, as I get into it, I do want to take a quick moment just to thank staff because with this one, there was a lot of work that was put into this one, and you'll start to see it through the presentation. So with this reserve update and kind of the Fourth Amendment, before getting to the actual slides, just two of our key goals with this one, we're trying to be as fiscally responsible as possible. And also we approach this reserve update just to make sure that we can just have as much stability for our customers as possible. So with that, let's match the next slide. So just by way of background, and just kind of through the agenda, we're going to go over three things. We're going to go over some reserve background and, kind of the history of our reserves. We did a big reserve quantification as one first item, and you'll see that the biggest kind of risk to the agency that you would need reserves for is this thing called the Power Charge Indifferent Adjustment, or PCIe for short. So because it's such a big number, there's no choice but to go into the explanation of it, which we're going to get into meeting. And then I'll turn it over to my colleague, Jeff Spengler, to go over some validation on just the new reserve policy that we're proposing. A couple more quick comments here. So we did, again, take a pretty prudent approach to quantifying these reserves, kind of this recommendation that comes up on board next week. And then we also just looked at additional ways that we can try to lower rates for customers through the development of the policy. I think as Member Emerson highlighted earlier, just by way of reserve background, two of our key strategic goals are one, to hit 180 days cash on hand. And then number two, with reserve and cash on hand, our second strategic goal is to get an investment grade credit rating, a public one. So those two kind of things go hand in hand. We're going to go into a lot more detail here with the reserve background section. So Community Power was first formed, I think for a number of you were here, former Chair Vasilakis, Chair Harris, all familiar faces, Member Scalfani. Our first reserve goal was 90 days cash. And it was kind of a interim target reserve goal, so we could try to build an interim target. We ended up hitting it, and then we ended up increasing that reserve goal from 90 days to 180 days cash. When we increased that reserve goal to 180 days cash on hand, it was really informed by kind of two major factors. Number one, we did a full review with our municipal financial advisor of all the investment grade CCAs. You can see the list on there, but those six CCAs on there all have the highest investment grade credit rating ones in CCAs, and they all have 180 days cash on hand as a reserve target. Secondarily to that, we also have a municipal financial advisor who also recommended 180 days cash on hand as our reserve target when we set that last year. So just by way of background, those two kind of things inform that 180 days cash on hand reserve target. But just a few hours ago, Dr. Washington presented the Community Power's latest Treasuries report. And through September, we're about 90% of the way there to hitting that 180-day reserve target. It's very likely that by October or November, we're going to hit the 180 days cash on hand. So now, now that we're approaching that reserve goal of 180 days cash on hand, it's really the time to figure out and ask the question now: is that the right target? Right? Is the review that we did of the CCAs correct? Is that financial advisor recommendation correct? So what do we do to try to figure that out? We did a pretty comprehensive multi-pronged approach to try to figure out what the right reserve target is for Community Power. Kind of the first thing is we really bolstered our risk function in the agency so that we can identify the risks to the agency, figure out ways that we would mitigate those risks. And one of the key mitigation factors would be the reserves and just having cash in the bank for big risks. Another big thing that we've been doing through various board meetings, we've been bringing these professional services contracts, but a lot of them are really to bring in just better modeling software and just more horsepower to be able to run different mathematical and statistical models so that we could get a better handle on kind of our energy portfolio and our revenue. And so the biggest software that we brought in is Sequant, which have these like massive stochastic models that run these like Monte Carlo simulations that can simulate our energy portfolio. So we greatly bolstered that function of just modeling. We also hired this expert risk consultant from Silicon Valley Clean Energy, who's well known in the CCA world as one of the leaders in risk, and is also investment grade CPA. And then we also utilize the American Public Power Association, this risk management best practices to try to just bolster this risk function and figure out whether or not we think 180 days cash on hand is the right target. So what the heck did this group do? So kind of that first row there, this group was able to use all of those tools to do a bottom-up approach to figure out, what the quantification, like mathematical reserve target is for the agency. My colleague Jeff Bengal will get into some more details on kind of the latter portion to that, because we also did that quantification of reserves and then we validated it through a few different areas. One, again, validating against other CCAs. We also looked at the credit rating agency criteria to figure out whether or not this target that we were proposing is the correct target. And then we also just looked across just different national median data to figure out whether or not, what we're proposing is the right number. Okay, we're kind of getting to the punchline here. In terms of like a big reserve quantification that we did, we took a really thoughtful, cautious, and prudent approach to try to quantify reserves. When you think of reserves, really you want to have reserves for emergency situations. If something is going to be an issue, let's say like a year or two from now, you have enough runway to plan for that. You don't really need reserves because if something's going to happen 2 years from now, you have enough time to forget your operation to plan around it. Reserves really are for those one-time shocks that you just can't make. So what we did through this risk team is we identified all the risks to the agency. We identified which ones were just immediate risks to the agency, figured out our mitigation strategy for those. Like reserves aren't the only option. Insurance, for example, is another option. We have Community Power has cybersecurity insurance. So we mitigate part of that risk with insurance. But what you see in front of you, though, is a list of risks to the agency where the proposal for mitigation is cash reserves. To go through a couple of these here, that first one for PCIA and generation rates, or snapback for short, that one really is the biggest risk to the agency. I mean, you can see it quantified there at $420 million, which is kind of more than half of that total number there at the bottom. That one really is the biggest risk to the agency, which I'm going to go into a lot more detail, so I'm not going to go into much explanation now.
And what is that risk? Could you elaborate on that?
Oh yeah, there's going to be 20 slides I can elaborate on. It's a good segue. But I'll go through a couple more of these. The second one there is just energy. So I'll give you an example of what's included in that energy line item. So just imagine the federal administration sets it, and then imagine that it costs more to build solar because those PVs and all the other materials to make solar more expensive. That'll affect some of the long-term PPA that we're purchasing power from. So that kind of second line item is meant to cover things such as higher prices for tariffs from our suppliers and any kind of like energy shock. So that's kind of the second biggest one. And then the third one that I'll mention in terms of load, some of our partner CCAs, mostly to the north, have participation rates as low as 86%. So we assume that that's kind of the floor of participation rates for CCAs and for community power. We're currently at 95.4% participation. So if we were to drop down from that 95% participation down to 86%, that kind of represents like the risk if something crazy happens, like bad press for community power, and folks choose to opt out. So the general idea with this list then is these are kind of the big immediate risks for the agency that reserve really are the way that we want to quantify these. So getting to the punchline here, it is actually pretty difficult for all of these risks to occur at once, right? Like the chance that everything happening is probably less than 1%. But the total of these reserves total of these risks is 771 million, or 278 days cash on. So in the reserve policy that we're proposing to move forward, we're proposing kind of a maximum reserve target of 270 days cash on hand, which is informed by this reserve quantification. And again, that's kind of a maximum. So And what my colleague is going to present shortly, the reserve policy that we're proposing to move forward is rather than having 180 days cash on hand target, we're proposing a range of 180 days up to 270 days cash on hand. One other note here, so I did mention that PCA and generation rates by far are the biggest risk to the agency, so we're going to go into a lot more detail on that here in a second. And then kind of one last thing, so in this proposed reserve policy, I mentioned 180 to 270 days, kind of at like the upper and lower bands. We're proposing 225 days cash on hand. That's the new proposed target reserve in the agency. And we got the 225 days cash on hand. Essentially by adjusting that kind of first big risk metric for PCA and rates, because the general idea is it fluctuates, and there's kind of a band for TCAA and rates fluctuate. So we believe 65% is enough reserves to target, so that we can manage around kind of the normal band of PCA and rates, and it also gives us kind of a balanced approach, so that we're not pouring too much cash, and we can still try to protect the agency and maintain rate stability for our customers. So that's kind of how we arrived at kind of the reserve quantification for this recommendation. But again, I mentioned the PCIA and rates are definitely the biggest factor here. So there's no choice but to go into it. Okay, so I just need to take a deep breath because it's going to be a pretty dense explanation. So prior to community power being formed back in 2021. Just like community power entered into long-term PPAs, SCG&E also entered into long-term PPA, right? They contracted for energy before we even existed that went out decades. They also had assets that they owned for their customers that again is going to be around in perpetuity. And so kind of the general idea then is with PCAA, when SCCP came around back in 2021, right, SCG&E still needs to pay for that energy, right? Like they entered into the same kind of agreements that we do for 20, 30 years, and needed to pay for those energy that they contracted for. And so PCAA really is the way that SCG&E gets made whole, right? So just imagine that SCG&E buys all this energy, and they're left holding the bag because all the customers, right? So then the idea then is SCG&E would then, in theory, sell this energy in the open market, and the open market will either be at this price or at this price, well, whatever it's going to be, right? The market changes daily, and just based on those market prices, PCAA really is the way that SCG&E gets made whole. One other quick comment: our customers aren't the only customers that pay PCAA. SCG&E and customers also pay PCAA, and it's a state mandated fee. But that kind of really is the general concept. Okay. That's not it. We're going to go really deep with the PCAA. So if you peel back another layer of PCAA, or again, the power charge indifferent adjustment, it's made up of two things. And we're going to go really deeply into that. The two things are the forecast for PCAA, kind of the longer acronym for that is ERA, or the Energy Resource Recovery Account, kind of at the top on that PowerPoint. The second part of PCAA is what we're calling the true-up, but the acronym for that's called PABA, or the Portfolio Allocation Balancing Account. But the idea is you take that forecast, you add that true-up, and that's PCAA. Okay, we're going to go really deep into this. All right, so my colleague Aaron Liu pretty shortly is going to present on 2026 rates. So we're using 2026 as an example here to try to explain PCAA. Thinking about that top forecast line there for PCIA, using a kind of a made-up example here, we're assuming that if you just take the renewable portion for what SCG&E contracting for energy, if we were just to assume that energy for renewables cost SCG&E $70 per megawatt, for what they're going to pay for 2026 for all that energy that went out. What happens is the CPUC, the California Public Utilities Commission, they make a forecast for what the energy would sell for in the open market in 2026. In this case, the actual forecast that the CPUC published was $62.45. So just the general idea is SCG&E is paying $70 per megawatt hour. They need to sell this energy in the open market because a bunch of the customers left. they'll get, they'll sell the energy in the open market for $62. So that difference, of $7 and change, they need to, SDG&E needs to be made whole for that difference, right? It's unfair that, you know, their customers left and they got left holding the bag for all this energy that they purchased. And so in 2026 rates, a component of it for PCIA then is getting paid back in this forecast for what SDG&E needs to be made whole for the energy that they contract. Okay, so that's the top part. That's the forecast. You guys following so far? Right. Let's get even deeper into the slightly more complicated version. Okay, so we're still thinking about 2026 rates, right? And then I mentioned there's a true up that has to happen. So in order to understand the true up, you got to go back another year. So back in 2024, SDG&E was setting rates for 2025, right? And again, it's just in this made up example, SDG&E is paying $70 per megawatt hour in 2024. The CPUC back then thought that energy was going to be $71.24. Okay, so then you take that $70 that SDG&E is paying, they'll get $71.24 in the open market. So in this case, SDG&E needs to pay back our customers $1.24 in PCIA, right? Because SDG&E is making money in the market this time for all the extra energy that they purchase. And that happens in 2025 rates. Okay. But just remember, that's a forecast for what the CPUC thought the price would be in 2025. The actual price in 2025 wasn't that $71.24. The actual price was that $63.86. So then again, it was $71.24 forecasted. The actual price here was $63.86. So SDG&E needs to be made whole for that difference, where they didn't make as much in 2025 as they thought they would. Okay, so I mentioned 2026 rates, right? So all of this true up happens in 2026 rates. That's kind of part two here, right? So that extra $7.38 is collected from SDCP customers to SDG&E through PCIA. Okay, and then that's the true up portion for PCIA. So then, you know, just kind of picking it together then, you know, that again, that top part is the forecasted price or the era. The bottom part is the true up or PABA for short. And then kind of together, that forecast plus that true up equals PCIA. Okay, one more point to make here, just to illustrate some math. So then in these examples, right, I'm assuming that's like $70 per megawatt hour for these renewable prices. Energy's dropped down way lower than $70. Like there's been portions of time where it's for renewables, particularly, it's dropped below $20, right? So just imagine that, you know, SDG&E is paying $70. They're only making $20 in the open market. So in those cases, SCCP customers are paying this massive difference for what SDG&E is not able to make in the open market. And because these massive differences can occur, that's why that PCIA line and that reserve quantification was so large. So then markets can move, energy can move, and they move pretty drastically. And so with those big movements, that's kind of why that reserve target or that reserve row for PCIA is like the biggest by far for community power.
Chair, can I ask a question before we go too much farther?
Yes.
Okay. Can you go back?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Tim. So remind me again, the difference in price in the PUC forecast and the market happens in what year? And then it hits Community Powers, like that bill becomes due in what year?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, and thank you for the question, Member Scalfani. Through the chair, it's a two-part, right? So part one is a forecast for what the price will be in 2026, right? So that part is hit in that top row.
Sorry, true. I'm focused on the true up.
Okay, yeah. So in the true up, in that true up scenario that I outlined here, that hits us in 2026.
Yeah, when did, based on what what period of time did that market activity happen?
Okay, good question. So in 2024, when they set that market price benchmark for that forecast,
Yeah.
I believe I could have my dates wrong here, but it's approximately I think it's between August, it's like a, oh gosh, I might have to put a printer. I think it's a 16-month period ending August for when they do that that forecast. And so that CPC market price benchmark comes out around like September, October timeframe.
Okay.
We just got that actual forecast here for the CPC market price benchmark in 2025.
Okay.
And again, it's based on like that same kind of time period.
Yeah.
And then so when SDG&E says their rates through these ERA updates, it's then based on that forecast.
So here's kind of like where I'm going. This is way too far in the weeds, like stuff that clearly your group is already like totally. My thought is like the top line, the ERA forecast, like that part's kind of known. That's like public info you get from the PUC and you plug it into a spreadsheet.
Yeah.
The bottom part with the true up, like that bill is happening so far in the future. Is it really gonna? Is there really a chance it materializes as like a sudden $400 million risk, or is it like you can be watching prices every day of the year and you know how that's going to hit your rates like 18 months? You kind of get what I'm saying?
Yeah, I see exactly what you're saying. Let me think this through. So yes, you're right in the sense that you could plan ahead for this stuff, right? Like if, for example, I think the price there was $71.54. Like if our energy traders are seeing prices at like $25, absolutely, you could project this stuff. And in fact, we do this projection, kind of do that risk management earlier. It's not exactly right, because then it's one thing to follow the open market price, which could be 25 less, but not all the energy is contracted for in the open market. So we're gonna get really deep in those CPUC market price benchmarks. They take a weighted average of all energy purchased in California for like whatever resource. Some of the energy is purchased in the open market. Some of it's long-term PPAs, right? Where just like us, there's solar farms, wind farms, whatever. Those have a different price, and we can't predict those because those prices are all proprietary to whomever purchased that energy. That'll weigh it down too, if that makes sense. So then we have visibility to what we're seeing, and we have visibility to our portion of the California load, but our portion of California load isn't substantial.
I thought.
Yeah, so it's hard to predict. And I try. I've tried to figure it out, and there's some trade issues trying to get that data together. Okay. All right, so just moving us on here. So again, forecast plus that true up equals PCIA. If there's big swings in the market price, there's going to be big swings in PCIA. We did look kind of historically at SDCP's energy cost over time, PCIA, and SDG&E rates, and that's kind of the chart since 2021. So a couple key points here. Number one is you can see the PCIA and SDG&E rates since 2021 have been very volatile. So kind of that top bar shows what SDG&E's generation rates have been. Those yellow bars show what PCIA has been for community power. And you can see like it's been volatile since 2021. In terms of what we actually collect in revenue and how we calculate SDCP's discount to SDG&E, we collect that blue bar in terms of revenue, right? That's our SDCP generation rate. That orange bar for PCIA, we don't collect that, right? That's SDCP customers paying SDG&E. But when you add those two things together, like what we get for revenue and what our customers pay for PCIA, those two things are what we use to figure out our discount against SDG&E, right? So if PCIA fluctuates, like it is more or less out of our control, because SDG&E already contracted for this energy. Our customers have to pay back SDG&E, so it's really a risk that's it's mostly out of our control. That's one of the big reasons why there's a big risk factor for the agency. We talked about those CPUC market price benchmarks that kind of inform PCIA. Those market price benchmarks are in three categories. I went over one with renewables. There's also resource adequacy. There's this general ground power energy. But since 2021, you can see those prices have fluctuated substantially since 2021. And that's just because of that fluctuation alone. That's one of the big reasons why PCIA, again, is a big risk factor for the agency because of the way it's calculated. currently, the market price benchmarks are very high, historically speaking. And again, you think about that example of that $70 per megawatt hour. If prices are high, then SCG doesn't need to get paid back as much, right? But then if prices are low, which they were in 2021, SCG needs to get paid back a lot more depreciated. You guys follow me so far? Okay, so then using this bolstered risk function that we created, we do a lot of stress testing and just risk mitigation as part of the stress testing. So we did a stress test on what would happen for 2026 if those 2021 energy prices came back to kind of the energy market. And you can see here through the stress test, we would lose 331 million or 120 days cash on hand if prices went down to those went down to those 2021 levels, because SDG would need to be paid back a lot more with those lower prices. We did another stress test, and I could do these stress tests all day. It's it's a thing that we enjoy greatly in the finance team. So if you look at some of our sister CCAs to the north in the PG&E territories, they're actually seeing some of this occurring right now, where PCAA has increased a lot, and then PG&E has decreased their rates pretty substantially. PG&E, yeah. And so we modeled that in the stress test. We also included another scenario where participation rates drop down to the 86% level. And then we assumed maybe a flood happens like back in January a few years ago, and then uncollectible rates increase. So using kind of the stress test model, we would lose $238 million in the scenario, or 99 days cash on hand. And so, I mentioned it because this is, somewhat of a real reality that's occurring up in the north with the PG&E territories. I'll give two quick examples. Sonoma Clean Power, again, a PG&E territory, CCA, they're choosing to dip into their reserves to kind of mitigate it. There's other CCAs who are choosing to just increase their rates, right? But the whole idea is, we want to manage around it by not increasing rates, but by having reserves to promote rate stability for our customers. So I know it's been super deep and super dense. There are other mitigation strategies here. One of the things that we're actively pursuing to just pressuring the CPUC or the California Public Utilities Commission, who sets these market price benchmarks, to just revise their methodology. Like one of the things, for example, that was just done was they took a 3-year average for resource adequacy prices so that you get more stability with the 3-year average as opposed to just like that 1-year price. And so one of the things that we're trying to advocate for through our Red Light team is just more ways to get this to be a little more less volatile. And then I think the obvious one that we're trying to propose right now is just more reserves to try to mitigate this like big risk factor. And so with that said, that is kind of the first portion of the presentation. So again, it's a proposed reserve change to 180 days to 270, kind of as the floor and the high, with a 225 days cash on hand target. Everything to do with this PCAA. And with that said, I'll turn it over to my colleague Jeb to get into kind of the validation.
And Member Emerson, did you have a clarifying question?
Yeah, yes. So maybe 2 questions. So market is volatile, variable. Is San Diego Gas Electric overpay for these contracts? That you look at.
What I think,
CPUC.
yeah, I just wanted to interrupt and just say, I don't think we should discuss this in
Not
other
clarify.
forum. Yeah,
Okay, can I ask another question? Why, on my bill, I didn't bring it, but it's a minus PCI.
Yeah, great question. So
Why is it a minus PCI?
yeah, it's a great question. So I put that example there where let's see, kind of at the bottom there, right? If you look at that bottom left, at number 2, where it's possible, and it just happened kind of this last year where like the prices were so high, right?
But next year, there might be a pop up added to my bill rather than subtracted.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So what's occurring this year is what you see at the bottom left, where SDG&E made money in the market. So SDG&E, I think I had it up here. they need to make our customers whole for that money that they're making in the market, the PCIA. If that makes sense. Yes, it's that. It's
So they're paying that back to.
yeah, that's why you see the negative
Power.
to the customer. Yeah, so we don't see PCIA.
Just pass it through.
Yeah, yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, so with that, I will turn over to my colleague Jeb, who's going to talk through that proposed reserve change and it's kind of validating the target. Jeb, I'm going to advance it for you. Step out of the way. Yeah.
Chair Harris, members of the committee, and thank you, Tim. Tim and I have been doing this presentation a lot recently, and I'm starting to hear Bob Barker and Price is Right. For right. Tim is starting to turn into Bob Barker. So Tim's already covered a lot of this. Sorry, that won't get through my part here. Tim already just covered the kind of the reserve strategy of having the 3 different thresholds and the range. The minimum really is grounded in the kind of the credit rating story that we've been telling over the last couple of years. 180 is kind of the floor that we see as being a responsible number to continue forward with obtaining and maintaining an investment grade credit rating, similar to our CCA peers. The 225 allows us to address kind of more cyclical, but kind of ongoing volatility that we see in the energy markets, but not, not to the extent that we would with the 270, which is the maximum, which gives us kind of the protection that Tim alluded to for the full risk menu, I guess you would say. Just wanted to highlight that this chart shows some of the historical volatility. This is the Henry Hub natural gas spot price market over the last 25-ish years, 27 years. And this kind of the natural gas price chart is representative of energy prices in general. And what we just want to highlight here is volatility is typically a 2 to 4 year issue. We see prices kind of maintain stability within the 2 to 4 year range. Sometimes it's a little longer at 8 years. The reason for the volatility varies from financial market impacts. The COVID shutdown impacted prices, energy storage swings, fluctuations one way or the other, and then even weather. So a number of different factors kind of impact the energy market volatility. The good news is, it's cyclical, so it comes and goes. Energy prices rise and fall over time. So you really are just trying to address, the 1 year period with the risk component, with the understanding that things will revert back to the additional kind of side of the equation somewhere down the road. So where are we now with reserves? This is just a quick snapshot of, we did some projections as of most recent financial data that we have as of September 30th. And we just wanted to see where reserves are now. Reserves as of our audit was right at $363 million or 115 days cash on hand. Our net position, which is our previous definition of reserves, that was just at $476 million or 170 days. Under current projections as of September 30th, not assuming really any kind of rate action or other considerations, we were projected to reach $213 million by the end of this upcoming or this current fiscal year, which is $583 million. So we would have exceeded the 180-day target by the end of the fiscal year and actually even get close to the 25 days of the new target. This next slide is a stress test that Tim showed. This is just kind of a little more detail on actually what could occur if we were to see that stress test. What I wanted to show was there is some recovery at the end of the stress. We could assume that the stress would occur in 2026, last throughout the year. We'd be able to use reserves to stabilize rates throughout the year. We'd hit a low balance of 120 days cash on hand or $330 million. But then we would start to see a recovery where we would be back to the 180-day minimum by October of 2027. So we would have another 10-ish months of 27 to get back to like our minimum floor. So Tim, we walked through the bottom-up approach in great detail. Thank you, Tim. What we also wanted to do was just validate that these numbers are appropriate and in line with primarily our peers across the CCA community, but also wanted to look at how our numbers are reserve thresholds, how they align with the credit rating criteria across the three nationally recognized credit rating agencies. And then a little less relevant, but we also just compared it to national medians data. There's several publications, including the American Public Power Association, that highlights public power medians data. And again, it's less relevant because it's public power and they have different risks that they manage to, but we used it as an additional data point just to make sure that we were in line with kind of industry standards. So our first comparison was actually looking at the reserve policies for every other CCA in California. On this chart, just by way of reference, the orange is actually their target, each of the CCA's target numbers. The green and the blue bars, but also I'll say actually blue is if the CCA has a minimum, that's their minimum balance or minimum target. And then the green bar is at maximum. The blue horizontal line is actually their audited unrestricted cash and investment balance. So you can see where these utilities most recent audited financial data, how it compares to what their policies actually say.
Is it one CCA or
These are all CCA. So we have
combined?
Yeah, so on the far left, I just included both our current policy, the community power current policy, and then the next one is our proposed policy. And then these are all of the other CCAs that we've gone through their financials and their policies. So we have a laundry list of all of the policies in California.
So averaging out 20-some CCA.
These are generally the ones that all have credit ratings. So we've kind of focused on the ones that have credit ratings.
They only have
Or
credit
larger,
rating.
yeah.
And that's, our aim is to kind of follow in their footsteps.
We use it more as a benchmark data point as like, are we in line with everybody else? And what I think, there's maybe CCAs that we look at as being maybe a bit more comparable, either as relative size or load or things of that matter. Tim referenced Silicon Valley Clean Energy. We follow a lot of kind of the same practices they have for risk management. And you can have kind of the same risk consultant involved. So we've used them as kind of one of the benchmarks that we kind of strive to be similar to. Ava Community Energy is another one that's has a robust risk management practice. So those two in particular are probably the closest peers that I would say are also have ranges similar to.
I'm sorry, I'm going to read the detail.
Yeah, I know that slide earlier.
I see now each company is listed there, so, yeah.
So the next slide is actually similar information from the first one, or the horizontal line on the first one. This is just a snapshot of audited financial data. For an apples to apples comparison, we used unrestricted cash and investments as of the most recent audit for each of these CCAs. As you'll notice, we are the little red bar on the far right, which means in comparison for days cash on hand on audited numbers, we're on the kind of the low end of our peers, but we've been slowly but meaningfully building our reserves up to where, the 180-day target, as I mentioned earlier, or Tim mentioned earlier, we're almost at the 180 days now. So you can kind of ignore the 115. This was just a point in time for all the CCAs. Also, we keep throwing around this term days cash on hand. I know there's a little confusion as to how we calculate that. So I've included an example here to the left. It's really just unrestricted cash and investments divided by total operating expenses times 365. So when you keep hearing 180 days cash on hand, it's really just 6 months of operating expenses. So everything falls apart. We'd have 6 months of operating expenses that could be covered by cash reserves. The next kind of set of criteria, and I'll look through this pretty quick here, are the three credit rating agencies. Each have their own specific criteria that they would look at to rate us if we were to choose any of these three agencies. So we would kind of pay attention to their particular criteria. Moody's, if you were to look for getting their strongest rating assessment, which is a AAA, they would suggest cash on hand of greater than 250 days. And that's part of their CCA. They rate CCAs under this joint action agency criteria model. And that's kind of their scorecard that they use. Next for S&P, similarly, for a very strong or even the highest extremely strong criteria, they assume somewhere between 150 and 270 days, which is ironically very, very close to ours. And Fitch, so full disclosure, this is my former employer, so I know a lot about them. Fitch assumes as long as you have 90 days of liquidity, it's not considered weak or risk additive to your rating. They do provide more credit, as I know, from for holding more cash. So anything greater than 90 days is considered neutral, but positive to the overall. And finally, I mentioned the national medians data. This comes from publications. Again, Fitch puts out a public report of public power utilities across the country. They break it down by rating categories and the days cash on hand, the median days cash on hand number that each of the utilities have within each of these specific rating categories. And assuming that we want to be in kind of this investment grade, higher investment grade credit rating category, anything north of, I would say, 143 to 296 days is where we would want to be. I'll real quick get into just some of the specific policy language revisions. We mentioned the range 180 as the minimum, 225 as the target, and then 270 as the maximum. We're doing a definition change of how we define reserves to be more kind of in line with credit rating industry standards. Historically, the definition of reserves has been net position, and we are changing that to be unrestricted cash, cash equivalents, and investments unencumbered by legal agreements. The reason for that change is the proposed is what the rating agencies would use to calculate our own criteria. So to the extent that we're reporting those numbers to you or to the board, we want to be in line with what the rating agency is putting out in their publications. Also, there are things that are in net position that are not liquid or readily available to pay in an emergency. There's restricted cash or there's accrued revenues. There's things that just wouldn't be available for some period of time. So net position isn't a wrong answer for it, but it's a better definition to go for the unrestricted cash. Finally, this is where I wrap up and we can take some questions. Reserves below the minimum balance, we're just providing some guidance to the board that we don't want to drop below the minimum if at all possible. It's kind of the floor that we want to try to maintain. An additional threshold on the upside, the maximum reserve balance, anything above the max, if we should reach that point, could be used for strategic investments, programmatic reserves, or other purposes as authorized by the board. And maybe most importantly for this group, we've built in this new reserve threshold that's between the target and the maximum, where we're allowing the board, or the board is allowed to dictate that reserve balance as rate stabilization funds. And rate stabilization funds would be an ongoing use of money that could be used to stabilize rates to address kind of normal volatility on a year-to-year basis. There are some accounting nuances with how rate stabilization funds are deferred to future years. So we'll be actually coming back to the board with a rate stabilization policy, specific policy, in the first part of 2026. But it is an important tool that we would then have to be able to use to stabilize and stabilize rates for customers.
For your presentation. It's the third part. Should we go ahead with that? The public comment. Okay.
We have none, Mr. Chair.
Okay, no public comment. Do members have any questions?
Did you mention the third part for this item?
No, I'm confused. So it's the next item is the, yes. It's the SDG proposed rates. So, no. This item is complete presentation. Yes.
Okay. If I can ask elaborate, a little bit of elaboration on the rate stabilization reserves that you quickly glanced over, because I think you did a great job explaining the risk, how the reserves serve as a shock absorber, especially to the agency, but a little bit less clear on how it serves as a shock absorber for the rate stabilization for customers.
Yes.
And you got to that in saying there's going to be a rate stabilization policy potentially, but that would be next year. So in lieu of that, how does it work as a shock absorber? Is it very discretionary to see if it would stabilize rates at all in the case of a?
So, yeah, so reserves in general can be used for rate stabilization purposes. There's the rate stabilization specific policy, or if we were to designate them as rate stabilization funds, it becomes a little more, there's some accounting nuances which requires you to basically defer revenues in the current year and to be recognized in the year when you need them. And that's a lot of like to meet covenant requirements and stuff like that. So that's why it needs to be a separate policy specific to rate stabilization.
So in lieu of those, when you do, for example, the moderate stress test, and it spells out on there how it would serve potentially as a shock absorber, absorbing some of these variables as not passing along to the rate payer.
Yeah.
Is there a formula? Is there a policy in place to how that's considered and when it's likely to be used?
It would be at the discretion of the board to be able to use reserves up to however much. We're trying to maintain the 180 days if possible, but we can dip below that to stabilize rates if we need to. So for any of those risks, so we use rate stabilization as a separate pool of money. Important to note that the rate stabilization money is actually all part of the reserve bucket. And again, the whole reserve bucket can be used for rate stabilization purposes or basically to get us through to another rate setting cycle or to minimize rate increases if we need to raise rates. So it basically adds as actually the buffer until you can actually take the appropriate rate action to right size the ship.
And a process question, this is a proposed update to the policy that will be taken up at the board.
Reserve policy?
Right,
The reserve policy will be going to the board next week, yes.
next week?
Yes.
Okay. And then this board is in a position to make recommendations, not make recommendations.
This board?
Yeah, no, it's making no positions.
This is a receive and file.
Yeah.
The staff is here and they are noting the comments. And to the extent they can incorporate that in their work, they might be able to, but this is a receive and file. stuff, right? This is not a recommendation.
That's right, yes. We presented this to the FRMC and they voted to approve recommendation to the board.
In my case, my only informal comment would be highlighting the importance of that rate stabilization reserve, especially if this increase is accepted, to formalize and strengthen the ability for this to serve as a shock absorber for the rate payer at one time.
Yeah.
I'll just say to follow up on your question. 2 years ago, last summer was pretty mild, but 2 years ago, I recall that our rates for summer actually were higher than SDG&E rates. And that's when we created the base power level. So our power on rate was actually higher. And at that time, I don't think the board elected to use any reserves because we didn't have sufficient. Can you elaborate on that at all?
I wasn't here at that
Okay.
period of time, but I generally know. But a rate stabilization pot specific for that could be used for those purposes to stabilize, even if it's just, summer rates to smooth out rates throughout the year. There's a number of different ways I think that money can be used. It is a very important internal component to our reserves strategy. It's gotten a lot of discussion. I know Aaron and his team on the rate side, they're equally involved in this whole reserves discussion. And just know that staff is taking the rate stabilization part very seriously. It probably would have been actually all included within this policy. The rate stabilization policy itself would have actually been a part of this. We needed to kind of separate it out for like the rates discussion and stuff, but it's something that we've taken very seriously, noting that it's important for the customer. But thank you for your comment.
Yes.
Well, this would be a question for Eric. I love this presentation. This is fantastic. But I'm also thinking about, maybe a year ago when we first heard about the reserves policy and then kind of the goal at that time was 180. In the next year, we'll quickly approach the target and hopefully, if things continue moving in the positive direction, at what point do you feel that there will be a discussion about profits above the 270 reserve? So at some point, hopefully we will hit the 270, then profits post that would be allocated to other areas other than the reserves. Do you imagine that there would be a conversation about what those funds will be used at around the 225, 250? Is there any early thought in that process?
So those reserves, those excess reserves, I'll refer to them as, those are at the discretion of the board to how they allocate those
Okay.
excess dollars. But I think Jeb or Tim may have alluded to, even in the existing reserve policy, it points to some of the things that those funds might be used for. So for example, funding, programs, some form of rebate potentially for customers. A lot of different things, but all of those spends will be at the discretion of the board. Of course, there'll be conversation and perhaps some recommendations from staff to the board on those spends, but that's sort of the trajectory that we're headed in terms of excess funds.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Just add, some of Tim's presentation alluded to some of the new application and forecasting tools that we have in our belt. A lot of what I think we're newly able to do, which was maybe not so possible about a year ago, we're able to start kind of projecting forward what things look like a little bit better than we used to. So our hope is that we will start having more, I think, frequent projections per se. We'll have a better tune of like what our reserve target looks like going forward. It'll be more based in a lot of energy market volatility that we see. And I think we'll have a better kind of understanding of future reserve balances at a certain period of time and what decisions need to be made at that period of time.
Yes.
Thank you. Just one quick question. When do some of these PCA contracts? Through the chair, thanks for the question, Member Vasilakis. In theory, you're right. PCAA should start to roll off over time. I'd say it's a little bit odd because I think some of the quantification that we've seen recently is kind of an indicator that perhaps it may not roll off over time. But it's something we're actively looking into because you're right. In theory, it's like I use a long-term PPA example where you count on a 30-year PPA, for example, and after 3 years, that should go away. So PCA shouldn't go away. So you're right. But it's something that we're actively monitoring too, just to make sure, because we don't have full visibility into PCIA, right? Since it's pretty proprietary in terms of who's actually paying for the energy. So we're monitoring, and I think in theory, you're right. Yeah. Thank you.
Just to follow up, I wanted to ask, several months ago, we had a presentation from the legislative and regulatory team about a PCIA hearing at the PUC, and I wondered if they changed the method of calculating PCIA and did that affect the analysis?
Yeah, absolutely. Good question, Chair Harris. It absolutely affected the analysis. So what the Reg and Leg team presented, there was like the CPUC track 1 hearing, where they made a change to the market price benchmark methodology. So there's 3 portions of PCA, the market price benchmark. There's resource adequacy, renewables, and energy. For the resource adequacy portion, they changed the methodology rather than having it be based on 1 year. They're using a 3-year average. Was it a 3-year average for the actual year and a 4-year average for the forecast? So the idea though with the average is it's less volatile, right? Because then you can predict it a lot better. So that was a big change. And then there should be another hearing coming up pretty shortly, the PCA track 2, where they haven't scoped the hearing yet. We're not sure exactly what's going to be in there, but it's going to hear PCIA and some other potential changes to try to hopefully reduce some of the volatility. We'll see.
Thank you. Any other questions? Member Mustin?
Clarification one more time. Okay, you just mentioned three factors.
Yeah.
Resource adequacy, renewables, which you also showed at the beginning.
Yeah.
And then you had a graph on natural gas.
Yeah,
That means natural gas is including energy costs.
No, so
Nuclear power, small power, and
yeah, so I guess to clarify, there was a chart that I had on there that had renewables, resource adequacy, and brown power.
brown power.
Brown. I mean, it's just normal energy. That's not necessarily renewable. But what Jeff was mentioning earlier, the energy portion is highly correlated to gas. So that's why we do that gas chart. Because just to show that the energy prices fluctuate as those gas prices fluctuate. Yeah. That was kind of the point of that one.
Right, this is a receive and file item and no further action is needed. Thank you very much. Now let's move on to, what item is this? Item 9, is it? Update on the SDG&E's 2026 projected rates. Is here to present Aaron Wu to make the presentation.
Yep. Good evening, everyone, committee members, community power staff, and any members of the general public. How are we feeling so far? My name is Aaron. I'm the Rates and Strategy Manager. Happy and it's a pleasure for me to provide an update on SDG's latest filings and highlight some of the information in terms of rate outlooks for 2026. So in terms of where we are in the rate development timeline, really all of this information that I will summarize and highlight throughout this presentation informs Community Power's rate development and rate setting process. It's well underway. SDG&E's latest filing came out in November. It's a preliminary outlook of their 2026 rates, and then there will be a final filing on the end of December, so December 31 to be exact, where SDG will publish their final set of 2026 rates as well as the PCIA rates. So here are the rate development policy objectives. We see these as really the guiding principles that underline our rate development process. I think a lot of these already been mentioned in the previous two presentations, right? Prudence in terms of our finances, affordability, a lot of other main factors. It's really a delicate balance to try to reach all of these objectives as much as possible when we set rates. Reminder, here you're going to see the power charge and difference adjustment. Again, PCIA, I won't go through all that in detail. I think Tim's already, kind of hammered the point home. Really just want to go over the different rate components that you would see on a typical electric bill. Either you're a Community Power customer or a San Diego Gas and Electric Bundle customer. So of course you have the generation rate with whether you're with Community Power or San Diego Gas and Electric. This is pretty much the rate that is charged for the load serving entity to purchase power on behalf of the customer. The second component is the delivery. That is really solely SDG&E. They have full monopoly on the transmission distribution assets. So those are paid for those services. Power charge and difference adjustment. Another way of looking at it is actually the above market costs. That's related to commitments in terms of power supply contracts that SDG made on behalf of customers before those customers departed to a CCA program such as Community Power. So all CCA customers pay PCIA, SDG customers pay the PCIA as well as we don't really talk about it much, but also direct access customers. So the last line item here, the major one is the franchise fee. It's a surcharge that the public jurisdictions collect for the use of the right for usually transmission distribution assets. And on the bottom is a table of an illustrative example of the latest joint rate comparison that shows all those components broken. I bring this up pretty much every year, but really want to stress in terms of why we have three sets of rates. And this is really the reason why, to enable equity and to reach equity and provide the same value proposition to all of our customers, we have to have three sets of rates because of how the PCI is set up. So Tim mentioned the PCIA earlier. Additional detail about the PCIA is that there's vintages tied to it. So applicable to community power are three vintages: 2020, 2021, 2022. Those are really the years when the customers left SDG service to get service from community power. That's why those are three vintages. And just kind of mathematically speaking, right, the four phases are linked to those three vintages that I brought up. And if you look at the table at the top right and then the graph on the bottom, Tim also mentioned in his presentation earlier, we calculate our rate by first looking at SDG&E's rate and then calculating the discount plus the PCIA and the franchise fee. So in order to provide the same value prop, for example, 3% or 5% to all customers, we have to have three sets of rates because PCIAs for those vintages are different. If we had the same set of rates, then the customers will get different value proposition, and then we're creating winners and losers. So want to highlight what SDG published in their latest November filing that I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation. Here is the bundle generation rate outlook for SDG&E. For the next few slides, all these tables are set up in a similar format. So the most left column going down are the different customer classes. And then the last row is the system total. And then the next three right columns, you have the current effective rates as of 10/1, and then you have the 2026 rates that SDG published in October from their ERA filing, so the Energy Resource Recovery Account that Tim mentioned earlier, and then their latest filing in November. And then the last two columns are the percent change between the current rates to their October filing and the current rates compared to their November filing. So the main item I want to highlight here, significant change in terms of the rate increase. As of October, they were looking at a 20% rate increases system total, but in November, they pretty much adjusted that down almost by half. So I think great overall for the customer, but still a rate increase in 2026. So the PCIA rate mentioned earlier, right? So same format, 2025. Committee member Emerson brought up earlier, as you can see, all the PCI rates for 2025 are negative. They're all credits. So you are correct. In 2026 projection, they're all going positive. So approximately increase of 4 cents per kilowatt for each customer. And then just to round out the whole picture, the delivery rate, even though it's solely SDG&E's responsibility, but we do want to consider that as we set rates, just in terms of bill impacts for the customer, since customers usually don't just look at generation, they'll look at their whole bills. So the delivery rate system total, it's going up by roughly 8% as of the latest filing, but it's uneven between the different customer classes. So residential, it's actually going up a lot more. And some of the other customer classes are going to see decreases on the numbers. Oh, one other thing to note is that we are pretty sure they're not yet final because there's some still open proposals and regulatory proceedings going out, like the wildfire mitigation costs. So those haven't been added in. So these numbers will probably go up a little bit more. So the last part I want to mention, in addition to all of these kind of status quo rate changes that are happening on 1/1/2026, SDG wrapped up their general rate case phase 2 this year as well. So this general rate case phase 2 started in 2024, got delayed, finally wrapped up. There's some additional rate design issues that we're considering as well as part of this rate setting. cycle, so it makes it a little bit even more complex. Four items to highlight here. One is definitely a big win for community power as well as all the other CCAs. So like I mentioned before, all customers paid the PCIA, but for community power and for the other CCAs, PCIA is a separate line item on the bill. And when we started service, a lot of customers were very confused. They compare their new CCA bill to their old SDG bill, and they all asked, what is this new PCI line item? Is it a new line item? Are we paying additional costs? It's not. So from this, GRC, after years of advocacy, SDG is now required to split out the PCI line item for their bundle bills too. So now it's an apples to apples comparison, huge in terms of customer transparency and better understanding of bills and electric costs and use. So definitely want to give a shout out to that one. And then the other three items are, one is typically customers pay a little bit more in the summer in terms of electric rates compared to the winter. So that seasonal volatility is going to go away a little bit or dampen a little bit moving forward on 1/1. SDG will be smoothing out that seasonality for the rest of their residential customer rates. Some of the residential customer rates already have a smoothing out, but now it's going to hit TOUDR1, which is our most popular customer class. And then the other two items here, the time of use expansion. So in March and April, there's a super off peak that goes from 10 to 2 p.m. Now that's going to be extended to the rest of the year. So the other 10 months of the year is going to have that alignment as well. And it's really a catch up to, PG&E and SC did that years ago. So SDG is finally following that trend. And then the last one is a new carve out of a medium commercial class out of the current existing medium large commercial industrial customer class to really align the cost of service for that class specifically. That will be implemented on April 1st. So 2 phases of implementation of all of these general rate case phase 2 structural changes. One on 1/1 aligned with the regular rate change, and another one on 4/1/2026. Okay. So just to summarize next steps, staff will continue to monitor these filings from SDG&E as well as any regulatory proceedings or legislative changes coming from the Public Utilities Commission as well as the legislature. At the end of the year, commodity rates, PCI rates, everything we really looked at today informs the decision-making going into setting community power rates. Staff will continue to recommend a trifurcation of rates as well, and then we'll be bringing to the board a rate adjustment recommendation on January 15th, beginning of the year next year. And then one more addition item related to the GRC phase 2 will very likely come before this committee as well as the board around the March timeframe, since there's that additional 4/1 rate change as well. So expect 2 rate changes next year. That concludes my presentation, and happy to take any questions.
Okay, does anyone have clarifying questions on the presentation? Is there any public comment on the side? No. I'm surprised. Okay,
I do have a clarifying question.
yes,
Um,
member Anderson.
You mentioned wildfire mitigation costs a little bit earlier. They are added into the delivery charges?
Yes.
And how do they calculate that? Is that annually, seasonally, and how do they add that into their costs?
I think the details more are in their proceeding. Happy to pass you the information if you want to take a look. I haven't followed it as closely, but if I recall correctly, I think it's from 2019 to 2022 is those costs that they're selling right now. So there's always a regulatory law.
If you look at a 3-year period, you're saying?
They're looking at that period right now. I don't know if it's standard in that 3-year cycle, but right now, I think if I recall correctly, they're looking at 2019 to 2022.
And then you used the GRC. Could you remind me what the GRC stands?
General rate case.
But just general rate.
So, Sean,
Maybe I guess that's a clarifying question. I
Okay.
don't know. You mentioned PCIA and how much that might not go away. I mean, what does that mean?
PCIA, so actually SDG's earliest vintage of the PCIA, I think, is 2009. Let's say a contract goes out for 12 years or 20 years, so you can kind of estimate. But I think those earlier renewable contracts may be longer, so that's why we haven't seen any of the PCIA as well. Yeah, that's their earliest PCIA, and then a new vintage gets added every year.
questions, discussions, comments? The rates, it sounds like we're looking at a double-digit increase in generation rate. If
For SDG, yes.
for SDG&E,
Yes, we are still working through our process.
we're pretty confident we'll continue to be competitive because that's the top priority and all those. I mean, there's several considerations. You have that one slide which showed all of them. Right, okay. But you can't tell us.
Right now, we're still working. All of this information is subject to change, right? Because
Right,
you saw between October and November, it can be totally different in December, so everything is in flux.
but you did say that summer variability will be smoothed out, so
That will be
we shouldn't see such a big jump.
for residential customers.
Residential.
Just residential.
Okay, well, that's positive.
Yep.
Yeah, okay. Looking for the positive.
It's in there somewhere.
Yeah, I don't think customers are gonna be, too happy with seeing their rates go up so much. But of course, we know why that's happening.
Since we're speaking, we're talking about, I do want to know, it's only on the generation side. So you'll still see that on the delivery side. We'll do what we can on our end, but you'll still see some of that volatility on the delivery side. Because SDG&E, they're gonna be made revenue neutral.
Mhm. That's good. Okay. Last chance, anyone else on this item? Okay, yes, go ahead.
I don't know if this was asked already, but just maybe a clarifying question with PCIA. Is it guaranteed to be a neutral cost to the customer? I know that, so it fluctuates over a multi-year process, right? The estimate versus the true up. At the end of the day, does SDG&E make any profit on PCIA?
For them, it's a pass-through. So all their generation is a pass-through. They don't make any money, but any costs, any revenues are passed on to the customer.
Okay, great, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Aaron.
Thank you.
This is the receive and file item and no further action is needed. Let's move on to our standing items. As a reminder, the CAC may suggest agenda items for our board of directors meeting agenda by communicating with the CAC chair, myself, and designated community power staff before and or after this meeting. It's suggested at this time there shall be no discussion or action by the CAC unless the item has been included on our agenda. Do any members have any recommendations on potential items for our board of directors? Okay, seeing none, let's move on to committee member announcements. Do any of our CAC members have items they'd like to share today? All right, then I'm gonna turn, yes, Clara. Member Hammond, please.
Thank you. This Saturday, there is a solar installation for a family in National City that was part of the San Diego Community Power Community Clean Energy Grant Program from last year with Olivewood Gardens. And we had hosted a youth workforce development workshop, and there are 2 slots open if anyone is interested in participating in the build. I have details that I can share. It's this Saturday from 8 a.m. to 3:30 p.m. If anyone wants to get on a roof and actually go through an installation with some other people who are interested in getting into the field.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Now I wanted to ask Vice Chair Montero Adams about your report on board activities.
Yeah, I will make this a little bit on the shorter side, but truly recommend anyone who did not have a chance to watch the board meeting to go back. There was a fantastic presentation by Chief Robert Resende on a subject item that we heard here at this board last month. I think his knowledge and capacity on battery storage truly made a thoughtful impact on how I see the role of safety and capacity for the region. So although we heard that item, being able to hear his perspective as both a regional commander for responses and a national expert truly was impactful. The board also had a chance to hear a presentation on the fiscal year and financial audit for 2024-2025. They adopted a resolution authorizing a grant with the California Energy Commission. They approved an agreement with CGI Technologies for a customer relation management or CRM platform. And they directed staff to review and incorporate additional requirements to enhance existing workforce language and commitments for new build renewable energy and storage projects. So really fantastic meeting, a chance for me to see all of the hard work that we've been doing that we implemented at the board level. So,
Sorry. Thank you. Any questions about the board meeting? Is there a volunteer for next Thursday, December? I don't know the date.
11.
Yeah. Okay. Want to. Okay, I'm going to volunteer myself because I will be attending the December 11th board meeting to make our quarterly report to the board. So I'm looking forward to that. It's always good to let the board know what the CAC has been working on. And, you know, of course, we'll highlight the formation of our subcommittees and some other good things we've been doing. I did want to inform everyone that Aida Castaneda, who has represented the city of National City since February of 2022, has officially resigned from her role effective December 2nd. We wish Aida the best as she continues to pursue her career at the County of San Diego, and we look forward to formally recognizing her service at a future Board of Directors meeting. Last thing, I wanted to thank this committee for successfully creating 3 separate ad hoc committees during our November meeting. Part of my role as chair, I've appointed the following members to serve on each of these committees. But starting first with the 2026 CAC Work Plan ad hoc committee, Member Vasilakis and Vice Chair Montero Adams will be serving on that committee, working with our able staff members, Leo Crespo. And then next, the Distributed Energy Infill Project Committee that will include members Scalafani, Sumner, and myself, 3 members. And then final committee is the Community Power Plan Evaluation Committee. It's going to take a look at how far we've come. We're halfway through the plan, the progress we've made. And that's going to be Secretary Pike, Member Emerson, and myself will serve on this committee along with Member Gonzalez. So that's the committee appointments. If there's anyone that they didn't mention that wants to serve on the committee, please see me after the meeting. And that brings us to the end of our agenda. I appreciate everyone's participation today. Thank you, staff, for your wonderful presentations. And we are adjourned until our next regular meeting, not January, February 12th, 2025 at 5:30 PM. So the Port of, we want to thank the Port of San Diego for their, room. Thank you. All right.
Thank you.
Happy holiday.